than never. Hey, Talesha. Hey, Bored. Hey, Rage is in chat too. Hey, Rage. Hey, Pseudo.
Hello.
Hi.
We're back, and we're not melting as much anymore.
It's still warm here. It's still, like 30-ish, 30, 33, 35 degrees.
Which
but
is
that's
lovely.
significantly better than 45 degrees.
I will take 30s any day now. 30s is like a nice mild temp after living through 42 degrees in my condo. It was so hot in the condo that I live in that my server couldn't even turn on. Every time I booted it, it just went, nah, man, it's too hot. IOHC overheat.
Yeah, I had to turn mine off. I'm like, this is bad. There's not enough airflow for this in this room. Oh, it's not good for the computers. Do not like.
Yeah, my server had lots of airflow in that room, but it also happened to be in a room that was getting baked by the sun at that time.
Doesn't help.
No, it didn't. I actually ended up having to go into my router and turn on DHCP and DNS on the router just so that we had working network in the house, because all of the DHCP and DNS in the house was just toast. Like when your server's going, nah, dog, I'm out. Like, it's hot.
Then it's a bad time.
I want a pretty dress still. I saw the cutest Pac-Man dress at the board game cafe, and I'm peak jealous. I want a Pac-Man dress too. Oh, you do have a Pac-Man shirt on. That's awesome. I want a Pac-Man dress now. I need a Pac-Man dress for stream. Send me the Pac-Man dress and I will wear it on stream.
This does not surprise me.
Gladly. Yep. So, game development learning paths. We've waited long enough to get a few people in here. Absolutely, Snow. Absolutely. I will rock it. Send me a tutu with it too if you want. I'll put the tutu around the dress.
I got a Capra Demon shirt.
Nice. Mine says cool. Mine is topical and relevant. It says stay a while and listen.
Very relevant.
That's why I wear this shirt for my panels. I only wear 2 shirts during panels, and that is stay a while and listen, or warning, may start talking about video games, which Snow pointed out is not much of a warning. It's just stating facts.
True.
Yeah.
you could also wear the Bergenworth shirt. That is another option.
I could, but it's dying.
Oh no.
Every time I wear it, it has less Bergenworth on it now.
Rip.
No.
Yes, very sad. I need another one because I love my Bergenworth shirt. So, has anybody in chat actually ever wanted to make video games before we get started?
I have this guy.
You're technically in chat. We can take that. I mean, the Pseudo's going to be doing a lot of the talking here, as often, because Pseudo's the one with all the brains of this group.
True.
Yep. So we're going to let him teach us about how to make games, and we're going to pay attention, and I hope you learn something as well. However, I also have a burrito to eat. So, Pseudo!
Hi. Sure. Yeah. I tried to think of something funny and that just blanked.
Oh shit, it's on me now!
Yeah. Well, there's going to be lots of topics, right? There's stuff. It's not even just like game development. There's going to be programming, there's art, there's design, and I think the design thing is going to be a big one for most of us. And that's something that is kind of one of the biggest topics for this. Is it's both very overrated and very underrated in the actual field. There's a lot of people who will kind of refer being like wanting to get into game design, but not really understanding what the extent of what the art goes to, and how much is actually involved in it. And it turns out it's quite a bit. It's a whole lot. It's a very important topic. Kind of what derives between just regular programming and game programming is you're now programming for the context of games and the design of them, and it kind of influences a whole lot of the choices you have to make. And it's the same thing with the art as well. There's modeling, and then there's modeling for games, and the decisions you have to make and the way you have to do it can be very different with the influence of game design. We've come a long way with technology, so it's not as, or there's a lot of those barriers have been knocked down. But this is why if you look back in like retro era or even like early console days, there's a lot of stylistic choices and a lot of sacrifices that kind of had to be made in order to have the games, run as they do, and have them still look like something. So it's a whole lot of stuff, but game development and game design is kind of what pulls everything together, and it's a very large topic, and it's something that three of us have quite a bit of experience in. But I think the main thing, I guess, is just starting off with kind of where people start and kind of like how to start.
Sorry to interrupt, but it just was such a perfect little segue into briefly talking real quick about UE5, because the new stuff that they're bringing in to reduce the work on the art assets as you import them is really fucking cool.
Just to touch on that super briefly, with the introduction of Windows 11, we're going to get access to a piece of technology called direct storage, which Deus and Sudo and I have been super excited about since it was announced. Basically what it does is it allows you to pull assets directly from a fast not hard drive, but a fast storage disk, and send that directly to the GPU's VRAM, which means that you don't have to deal with it going through the CPU and needing to do all of that processing there, increasing the latency on that call to the storage device. And in essence, what that's going to allow us to do is pull in extremely high detail models and work with them directly in the GPU, rather than having to, do all sorts of processing through the CPU first and making it more difficult to render that next frame.
It's going to be nuts. It's going to be one of the major leaps. Like, a lot of people are, freaking out over. Everyone's excited for, of course, like ray tracing and all this other stuff. But I think direct storage is going to have the most impact over games, because it's going to be something that changes the design. Like I said, it opens up a whole new avenue of game design, which is something we're starting to see with the games that just have zero loading screens now, and the stuff you can do with that. And I recently just beat the new Ratchet and Clank for PS5, and you are jumping between these high fidelity worlds through portals in an instant, and it's amazing how fast the textures load. And sometimes you'll see a little bit of pop, but very, very rarely. And these just large environments that you're just cycling through, and it's mostly like a bit of it is still a bit tech demo-y, and you'll see that a lot when new technology comes out, as people are kind of playing through and figuring out how to use the new stuff. I'll kind of talk more about that in game design when it's trying something new, and how you can analyze and make note of that. But it's going to be a huge deal, just being able to load these assets in an instant, and the amount of crazy stuff we're going to be able to see and pull off.
So yeah, I watched some footage of the new Ratchet and Clank, and honestly, that game is like, when you look at it and when you just approach it as an video game, you're like, yeah, sure, why wouldn't you be able to do that effect? Like, that's something that we absolutely should be able to do. But the thing that makes that possible is the high-speed storage and the ability to take information directly from that high-speed storage and use it just immediately. You don't have to process it. You don't have to do anything. It just does it. Mind-blowingly cool.
Yeah, so I didn't expect everyone to understand that. In fact, I expected most people to not fully understand that, but I wanted to mention it. So now let's get to explaining about game dev, so maybe you will understand it. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, there's one thing I'm going to do is just, if you ever have questions, please just put them in. If I can't answer them right away, if we don't know right away, we'll keep them in the document at least, and we can address them later. Or even if I'm just kind of on a bit of a tangent, we'll make sure to kind of track them so we can get back to them, and hopefully even kind of organize them into the topics, so that this document is something that can be saved and shared and can be a bit of a resource. So any questions about game development stuff? I'm in no means a professional. I do it as a hobby, but I do love learning about it. So if there's something I don't know, I love to be able to go and try and find that for someone.
Okay, let's be clear. You don't do it professionally. It's a hobby, but you are going to post-secondary to learn more about it, just because you want to learn more about it. So it's a little bit more than a hobby, I'd say. It is a hobby, but you take it a lot more seriously than most people take their hobbies, and you have a lot of great insight.
It's definitely a passion.
Yes, there you go. That's a better term. It's a passion.
Yeah. Not doing it for the bills as of yet, but it's definitely my passion, and I love game design. It's the main thing. Game programming is fun, but just game design is just such an interesting thing. Anywhere from just, watching the reactions of players react to certain things, the psychology behind it, or even just the intrinsic styles or just the creativity that it allows you to do. And even if you're just making a game for yourself, there's a lot of really cool things that kind of go into it as an art form. But yeah, that's kind of the main thing. I say questions, I'll kind of just post some questions and answer them myself just because they're kind of common stuff. And a bunch of the stuff will just be kind of suggestions as well. But the first thing is kind of, most people have questions there. It's like, where do I start? And this really kind of depends on what your goals are and what you kind of want to do. It's like, is this going to be like, do you want to make games for fun as a hobby? Are you looking to make a full career out of this? You want to be able to pay the bills? Or do you want to kind of have this as a bit of a side thing? And, those are all kind of different things. One's kind of, we're working on things on the weekend and stuff like that. One is, you're working for a larger corporation, working on games in that whole industry. You want to get immersed in, or if you want to just go indie and kind of be in a smaller environment, smaller studio, not so much, paying your bills. You'll probably have other means of income, but you're a bit more involved than, doing it on the hobby. You'll likely still kind of have, publishing and deadlines and a bit more of a, not so much a hobby at that point as well. That really kind of comes down to person by person and how much they want to put into it, as well as, how things are. But at the very least of it, it's kind of...
Uh-oh.
Nope, we lost Pseudo's audio.
We lost Pseudo entirely. It just
we
froze
lost the
and hung.
whole
And
Pseudo.
that means we have to say something.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Well, there's a couple of different ways. There's a couple of different ways that you can start down the path of learning about game development. And the path that I took is just play a lot of video games. Just like a lot of video games.
My start was board games. When I was when I was very, very young, I started making board games. Like 7, 8, 9 kind of era. I played a lot of board games with family, and I just got into making board games. And the first games I made sucked, let me tell you.
Oh, yeah.
They were not good games.
Expect your first, couple hundred little games ideas to be pretty terrible.
Yeah, the practice comes in implementing them as well. But welcome back, Pseudo. We managed to fill your gap.
Awesome. Like everyone starts different. And a big major thing that people don't realize I'm going to cover, which is very glad you said, is it doesn't have to be digital. Board games, pen and paper games, all that stuff, that's all still game development. It's a fantastic way to start. At that point, you are making games. You don't have to make them from scratch either. A really big thing to do is modding. Modifying games. And you'll see this all the time just naturally occur through board games too. They're referred to as house rules. With Monopoly, certain players or certain people, when you land on free parking, you get all the money that's been paid in for like the taxes and all the events and stuff like that. Those are house rules. Those are modifications of the game, and there's no limit to how much you want to do. And it gives you a good sense of the balance. And I highly suggest taking your favorite games and try modding them, because it gives you a real good insight into why certain decisions were made the way they were. You get an insight into balance, because sometimes you'll think that you'll have an idea like, oh, this will make the game, super fun. Things like, well, what if, money was a lot more frequent, and what if all this stuff? But then you start seeing that, the game designers probably went through the same process and came to these same conclusions of, okay, well, now it's kind of a pain to have all this money all the time. It's harder to manage. And for digital games, okay, well, why don't we have, infinite ammo or all this other stuff, or like higher jump height, and you go through all these tweaks and balances. And when you try modifying things, especially as a beginner, you start to kind of run into the same issues that people did when creating the game, and you start kind of seeing like, oh, I understand the choices that they're making and why the games ended up why they did. And balance is one of the hardest things to do, and that's kind of like the bread and butter of what a lot of game development will kind of be, which will just be tweaking values and playtesting, and then tweaking values and playtesting, and tweaking values and playtesting. And that's, that's what game development is. That's when you're actually developing the game. Everything before then, you're kind of developing the tools to get to the point of developing the game, but actual game development is just play, iterate until it's at a state that you're, happy and it's fun.
Yep.
And that iteration cycle, that iteration and playtest cycle is actually ridiculously important. And when you don't have enough playtests, Deus typing. There we go.
Well, I hit up and I hit delete and I hit enter to get rid of the last character. But when you hit up, it defaults the line for input to the beginning of the word, not the end of the word. So I deleted nothing and just hit enter right away.
But that, as I was saying, that playtest cycle is super, super important. Yeah, go ahead and post a link, Snow. The result of that is how your game actually becomes fun and balanced. If you don't playtest often enough, if you don't playtest thoroughly enough, then you end up in a situation where you've got like all of these great ideas, but none of them really mesh together as well as you thought they would. Which is very disappointing.
Yeah, and it's another important thing about game development is prepare to be disappointed and prepare for people to not like the ideas. It's just how things are. It's also good to find a group of people who will be honest with you and not kind of sugarcoat things to test your ideas. You know, at first when you're excited, it's going to be kind of hard, and like constructive criticism isn't hard. And some people take it too far. Some people will kind of just, you know, put you down for whatever reason. This industry can be kind of, you know, bad for that. There's some people who, you know, will put you down for using certain engines and stuff, but
that's every industry too. Just don't let people's opinions bother you. Don't do it. Their life is too short to care what other people think. You do you. You do what you enjoy, and we'll be here to back you up.
Game development, like Raid was saying, it's playtesting, iterate, changes, playtest, iterate, changes, playtest. Doesn't sound super exciting, but it's actually quite fun.
Think of it as playing games, and playing games. That's what you're doing.
Except you can fix it because you have access to the source, so you can fix it.
Yeah. So all those times you were playing a game and went, "Damn, this should not be like this." Now you can play it and go, "Damn, that should not be like this," and change it.
And that's the beauty of modding, is that it kind of lets you dive into that. So I'll start a bit with my background into kind of how I got started with games and stuff too. Like started very young, of course, playing board games and stuff with family, and then got really early into video games thanks to Deus. You know, older brother being, hey, these are the good games to play, all that kind of good stuff. And then, you know, I didn't make too many of my own pen and paper stuff. I kind of just played. It wasn't until I was teen years and into high school I started getting more curious about like what, you know, goes into making a game and what things are. And there's the first instance of at least modding was for me was there's a game I've talked about before called Medieval Conquest. And it's it's a game that you kind of find in like the $5 bin at Walmart. I don't know if it ever really saw like a full release. It's not a very highly rated game. But the premise of the game is you kind of have a town, and there's other games that are like it. I can't remember what they're called. If they're genres, but you have a town full of like heroes, and you basically supply them with gear, and they go out and do the quests for you, and they level up, and you get better gear and more shopkeepers and stuff for them like that. But this game wasn't
little management sim sort of, well, not necessarily sim, but management style game.
Yeah, exactly. But this game didn't have a sandbox mode, and it really should have. And what I ended up doing, and I'm probably on I would have been really up. I would have been like 11 or 12 at this point, but I was into like, you know, finding cheats and doing stuff like that to kind of make games fun. I know Dave showed me the like console in Morrowind, and that blew my mind. You know, being able to type command like kill and the thing in front of me just dies, or type, you know, give item and I just get it. I felt like a hack the Matrix or something. So I was always kind of into that stuff. So in this game, there's no sandbox mode. And the way the game works is that you just have this stuff, and then you upgrade these guys, and they go and complete your quest, and then that's it. You know, your mission's done. You start the next mission, you start from scratch, and like that pissed me off. I didn't like that. So what I ended up doing is just when I'd start the mission, I would just make sure that mission objective was one that couldn't be completed by accident. And then there was a cheat to spawn enemies, and all I would do was just continuously spawn enemies around the town, and my heroes would have to fight them. And my town kept getting bigger and bigger, and more heroes, and they'd level up and get all this good gear. And I'd play hours and hours and hours on a single level that's supposed to take like 15 minutes, just because I turned it into a sandbox game. And it's not an official mod. I didn't have to write code for it. I just used existing tools and cheats. And that was my kind of first foray into modding. And I'm like, hey, like I didn't have the skills at the time to, you know, write mods. I didn't even know they were really a thing. But that's kind of the idea behind it, is you can, you know, take all the pieces that are there if it's missing something. And if you know that it's missing something and you wish it had it, you can actually, you know, make those changes yourself and see if they're fun or not. And that's just the interest that grabbed me from there. And then from then on, I've kind of just been interested in modding, which led to, programming and stuff like that, because you'll kind of need to have an idea of programming to really kind of make those changes. If there's not like official mod support with easier scripting languages or something like Lua, you're going to have to kind of get a bit dirty into the code. But there's a lot of motivation behind it is the main thing is for this industry, is making sure there's motivation, because it will take some time and some frustration, but it is worth it. And then from there, I started using game engines like Game Maker and RPG Maker, and stuff like that, stuff that wasn't really in Construct, because I wasn't much of a coder, and I was starting at high school, and my high school didn't have the best programming teaching or instruction, and I wasn't too aware of being able to, do things myself for resources out there. So I was just kind of doing what I could, and that was kind of...
Just want to sneak in there that none of you watching this are on your own, because what we struggled on, you can ask us.
We made the mistakes, so you don't have to.
We're literally here for you to ask us questions. Jump in the Discord. We're always around. Come ask. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, for sure. I say I left a section at the top here for questions. So even during chat, fire them off if anything you're thinking of or curious about. So yeah, and there's a lot of stuff that you can push these engines to do that I wasn't really too aware of. When I was making a music game in RPG Maker, and I ended up writing a whole MP3 player as an item in the game by exploiting the consumable. Basically, when the item was consumed, it would give the player the item itself, but that allowed me to hook in event triggers and a menu to pop open. And then when I've interacted with that menu, I could change background music and dungeon music, so you could actually change the background track and all that other kind of stuff. And it was, not an intentional thing, and it's not really too much of programming. It was just playing around with the built-in event stuff. But you can really push these things to the limit if you kind of get in that. And I kind of just thank the modding mindset beforehand to getting into there, because I was modding kind of before I was programming. But don't always, limit yourself to what, you feel like you can't do because of your skill set. Just explore your creativity is the main thing, and just kind of feel that motivation and go for it. Don't hold yourself back because you think, it might not work, you might fail. It's fine, and it's part of the process.
Yeah, failing is part of the process. We're always preaching this on the channel. Don't be afraid to fail. Go make the mistake. The failure isn't losing. Failure is learning.
Yeah, and then like my most recent example of that was Company of Heroes, and Company of Heroes 2 is one of my favorite RTS games. But I always played the first one because the second one made a bunch of changes I didn't like, and it, for some reason, never really clicked for me to try modding those changes until recently. Because a friend reached out, like, "Hey, why aren't you playing the second one?" I'm like, "Oh, I have these issues." Like, well, there's some mods that address those. I'm like, "Oh, right." Like mods and
mods are a thing.
Steam has workshop support, but the problem is that there was no mod that did everything I wanted. But thankfully, since most of the stuff is open source and there's documents for the API for modding this game, I just went in and wrote the mods that I wanted. And the main issue for me is that the camera was stuck at such a zoom level that you could only see a couple enemy. You can only have a handful of units, really on the screen at once. You couldn't get a big overview of the picture, and I wasn't sure if that was done for optimization, or if it's just supposed to be the game is supposed to be close battles between squads. And I'm like, I want to zoom out because I want to move across the map faster, see all my tanks and stuff. But thankfully that's adjustable in the mods. I can adjust zoom out. Population caps have always pissed me off in video games, so I'm like, just remove that, set that to 9999. My computer, if it crashes, it's my fault. Screw it.
Just play Zerg, man. Just play Zerg.
Yeah, I mean, I do the same thing, but with Russians. It's great. Company Heroes is fantastic. But it's
Russian Zergs.
They have the order to not retreat. It's messed up, but it's for but yeah, like I said, it was mods I just got to write, and my friend was like, I sent it over to him, and we played those games quite often because you could both use the same mods and tweak a bunch of stuff. And the main thing, this was what really kind of opened my eyes to more than just making changes. There was a bug in the game where after a certain period of time, the AI just kind of gave up. What we love to do is just lock down any kind of choke point and just build so much artillery that we just blow them up as they show up, and that was just really fun. Like, it wasn't even winning at that point. It was just like having like an armada of tanks show up, and you just call in artillery, and just the game is really good, like sound design and physics for like.
What you did is you turned it into a turret defense.
Yeah, we turned it into a tower defense basically. But the AI would bug, and after like 30 40 minutes it would basically learn. It wouldn't bug, but it would learn like, okay, I got to stop doing that, and it would kind of just turtle and build up forces for you to come and take over. And I'm like, that's not fun. Like, come on, I promise you'll make it through this time. Like, come in. So I can go in the mods, and I saw there's all the scripting for the AI behaviors and all that stuff, and I could make it so there's triggers so that they just keep aggressive and keep going. And I'm like, oh hell yeah. And then started tweaking things, and I'm like, well, if it realizes it's in this terrible state, I'm like, whatever, we'll just double or triple their production rate so that they can just keep making more. Because if that's the case, I'm sitting fine with artillery, and then all of a sudden it's just a wild mess of just destruction, and it's stuff like that. And then that kind of gives you ideas to make other games. Now I want to make a tower defense game where you just have this armada of artillery. You just can destroy the landscape, and you hold down objectives, and you still have units to move, but the main thing is just calling in these like major artillery and support strikes, because it's kind of fun. And if you look at the Company Heroes Workshop community, the top rated maps are all maps that are just long stretches or have bridges that you can put choke points on, because it is fun. It's satisfying for whatever reason to just lock down a point and just have like that control, or have endless waves of enemies coming forward, and you can just call in artillery on them. But that's kind of it. Like, that's what my path was for the most part. I do a bunch of kind of indie game dev and stuff on the side, fun stuff. But my main thing that I really liked was just modding existing games and the design for that. So then I just go from there on to, analysis of why do I like this, and why are these changes here, and why do they do these certain things, and stuff like that.
And that's a question that we have tried to approach a couple of times on the channel now. One of the favorite panels that we've done was, why do people play the games that they play? Like, why do they like these things? And the reason I loved it is because it opened my eyes. I didn't understand the motivations for the whole Padia style of play. Like, I'm very much into the focused, really tight experience, but that's not necessarily for everybody, and I love that. But figuring out what your motivation is for being able to develop a video game, like what problem are you trying to solve, what hole are you trying to fill, is super, super important.
Yeah.
And
you can't build a game. Sorry, you can't
create something that fills that hole for you. Deus, I'm gonna finish my point, damn it. If you can make something that will fill that hole for you, then go for it. It'll be great.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you can't make a game unless you understand why the people who are going to play it want to play it. If you have a better understanding of why people play games, then you can make a wider variety of games. Maybe even a game you wouldn't necessarily want to play yourself, and still have it be enjoyable.
Lewd, Val.
Yeah, as Val brought up with Bethesda and the modding community, like, and it's interesting, we had the topic about why people play games, and it's kind of an important thing too, because like Skyrim is one of the best selling games, and a lot of people didn't really put into too much effort why. They just kind of assumed like, oh, people just eat up mediocre games, just kind of how like the public eats up a lot of what people refer to as mediocre music or whatever. They assume that, and Skyrim by all means is a mediocre game, but what it does well, as we talk about in that panel you can go watch, is it addresses the sandbox without officially being a sandbox really well, and it's that players can go in and make their own experiences, and then the modding community players go in and kind of make their own games in it. It's a lot of people, even without knowing it, kind of end up as game developers, especially when they have that kind of sandbox approach, right? The game doesn't explicitly tell you this is how you do things, or this is the result of your things. You kind of can put a bit of your imagination in and create these kind of meta sub games inside of them.
For sure. Catching up on chat there.
Yeah. I'm gonna pop that out and move it to my proper monitor. It is like far away from me. I meant to do that earlier.
I understand.
Pop out. There we go. Yeah. And the main thing is like, this is mostly just like from personal experience with advice. Make games that are, depending on your target audience is and what you're doing from just a passion or a hobby perspective, make games that are, fun for you. And if that's the case, at least there's one person who enjoys it, but we're not super unique. If you enjoy it, chances are there's going to be other people who are going to enjoy it as well. And that's kind of where a lot of mods come from. When people would mod, source games, it's a small group of people who kind of have an idea for a game they think might be fun. And then turns out a lot of people, have that same kind of idea that would have really been fun. So once it's implemented, they love it. You look at all the custom game modes that came out of like the source engine, like zombies. That was a whole lot of fun. Prop hunt, all this other stuff. This is all games that exist meta inside a game. And then there's Gary's mod, which is just, I don't even know how to describe what kind of game that
it's
sandbox.
a modding platform.
Yeah. But all the games that can stand out in their own genre that come out of that stuff. So if you want to be a game developer, you don't even have to, really know how to program or anything. You can take an existing game and just come up with house rules. Like you look at 007, GoldenEye, a lot of the kind of house rule modes that came out of that, certain weapons only, certain characters only, all this other kind of stuff. If you want to get into game development, you don't have to know these skills right away. You can start doing it just by analyzing games and figuring out what you would like to improve that you think would be fun, and then finding out if other people think the same way.
And odds are there will be somebody who thinks the same way.
It's so beautiful.
Unless you make ET.
It's so beautiful today too, because you have so many more tools available to you. Like if you're just getting into it and you have no development skills or anything like that at all, get Tabletop Simulator and just start making up board games. It's super easy, and you've got all the tokens and pieces and dice, and you can just make a game and play it with people, which is just awesome. Thank you, developers. That was an amazing toy tool. I owned and beat Atari ET as a kid.
I didn't know I could beat that. I thought the game just beats you.
Yeah, child abuse is just unacceptable, and I'm so glad we're trying to do away with it.
I'm glad. Actually, it's a good topic to bring up to segue into something. I want to talk a bit about game design first, before going into kind of game development for programming, because it's a bit more broad, and I'll probably touch on it a bit more too. But what a really good thing to do. Damn clipboard.
Because this is specifically game development learning paths. So we will go into the dev, but you can't build a game if you don't have a game, and you need to be able to design a game.
And what I want to talk about ET, and for those who don't know, the infamous Atari ET game, is that it's regarded as one of the worst games ever made, and it also gets attributed to the video game crash in the 70s that happened. And that was just because so many games were being shoveled out that weren't, really games, and these things still cost like $50-$60 back then, so they were not cheap. You weren't really getting your money's worth or anything, and it caused a lot of issues. And a good thing about this is when you are interested in game design or even game development, what you're going to want to do is analyze as many games as you can, and try to break them down. And we've covered topics and kind of how to do that before, but we can go more in depth another time or in the future as well, kind of how to do a full analysis on a game and break down its design. If you want to analyze programming and mechanics, you can do that as well and try and figure out how that works. But the main thing is analyzing design and why did they make decisions they made, and why was that the case? Will I run into the same thing one day? What should I do if that happens? And ET is a great one. It's like everyone calls it bad, but a lot of people don't look into why it was bad, and not just why it was bad, but how it ended up being so bad. And the main thing was they were chasing money, and it was a very short development time. They didn't have iterate playtest. I think it was made by like one person.
Yep. Well, that was the norm in that era, though. Almost every game in that system is made by one person.
Yeah. So the big thing about that is it's probably one person, and he was probably the only one playtesting it. So when you're in your own little bubble like that, it's really hard. Or it's really easy to kind of get into a rhythm of understanding what the point is, and using your own affordances, your own prior knowledge to knowing how to play the game. But then if someone goes to play it for the first time, they're going to be super lost, and it's going to be frustrating.
I saw an interview with the dev, and I want to give him some credit because he was actually a really well-respected game developer at the time, and he made some really good games before it. And in the interview, he said they came to him and they said, "We have this much time and this much money. What can you give us?" And money wasn't an issue, but in the amount of time, he just kind of thought, what can I build in that amount of time? He came up with something and pitched it to them, and even he said he should have just turned it down. It was just not enough time to build anything.
Yeah, it was turnaround time. It happens when you do licensed games. You have a lot of external factors to that. They just want to capitalize on the IP to make money, and there's a short time of window when that will still be relevant. We're kind of making fun of Avatar for releasing a game so long after the movie came out, and it's to do with the new movie coming out. But it's weird to have the game before the movie because you're so used to having it be relevant, fresh in pop culture and all that kind of stuff to really capitalize on people just buying it because they're not going to really know much about the game. They're just going to get it because I really like the ET movie. I want more of that. But yeah, it was crunched. It wasn't play tested properly or iterated, and the people involved didn't really care if it was. They just assumed it would do well based on the name, not based on the quality of the art. So it tanked bad, and it was real bad. And it wasn't so much that it was just bad design. It was just they didn't have a chance to iterate through it and have the chance to correct it. It was rushed, and it's good to analyze that and figure out why, because you might be in positions of the same thing when you're working on games where you're going to be rushed and you're going to have to make these decisions. And it's always easy to call something bad, but it's harder to call something bad and then suggest an improvement for it.
Yeah. I think the most noteworthy thing is that he is a well-respected developer that made good games. That's what a little bit of rush can do.
And this is the same sort of thing that we see more recently with games like Cyberpunk 2077, where the game itself has a lot of amazing stuff in it, but they didn't get to finish it.
Yeah, that game's going to be really good in another 3/4 of a year or so when they actually finish it. And I look forward to playing it again. I played it on release, and I'm going to wait till all the patches are in place, and I'm going to play it again, and then we'll do a panel about the differences, and that'll be fun. What they've done to fix it. We can look at the design in the initial game and the design in the final patched form, and look at what's come.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate event we're getting into now where games are released a bit too early and undercooked.
Yeah, the Blizzard approach is not really a thing anymore now that Blizzard doesn't exist. They had a lot of people who were very disappointed in them for not releasing a lot of the games. Personally, I'm very disappointed that StarCraft Ghost never came out. I would have loved that. But the result was that all of Blizzard North's games are legendary. All of them.
Yes, every game that Blizzard North made started a long-standing multi-million-dollar IP. So, there's that. Warcraft. Diablo.
Starcraft. I mean, some of the older stuff didn't get franchised. I would love another Rock and Roll Racing, just saying.
Yeah.
Or,
Lost Vikings. Lost Vikings done right. Yeah.
Everything they have made was amazing, and it's because they didn't have like a release window that they were trying to hit. They released the games when they were fun and when they were finished. And those are the two important things.
I don't like Blackthorn at all, but a lot of people seem to, so that's fine.
Blackthorn's got a cult following.
It does.
A very, very cult following.
It has I think it's compared. I can't remember what the other game is. There's other games that follow its style as well. Or it was following another game's style. I honestly don't know a lot about that one because I never liked it. So I never researched it.
Same.
Somebody in chat teach us about Blackthorn. We want to know more.
But anyway, back on topic. As we were saying, like the important thing is to spend the time doing your playtest cycles. And if the game's not fun, maybe don't release it.
Yeah.
Or rebake it and remake, which happens sometimes. It's a lot harder to do when you're a large corporation with hundreds of millions already spent. But if you're hobby or indie, you'll get to a point. This will happen quite a bit, especially your first games. And don't worry, you'll have a great idea, you'll think it's great, you'll implement it, and it won't be fun. It might be fun for a bit, but it's right to go from something from brain to paper, or from brain to paper to implementation. is a big step. And, you know, at least for me, when I have ideas, I'm kind of like, yeah, they're my ideas, and you know, I like to have fun, so of course it's going to be fun. But it's a whole different means when you actually try it. You know, it might not, doesn't mean it's going to be terrible and you're like, this is the worst thing I've ever done, oh my god. It's going to just be like, it might not live up to what you thought it would be, and that's very common. But it's why it's really important to test it, but not also that, but get other people to test it, and find kind of what your target audience is, you know, going to be. You know, if it's like similar friends or stuff like that, you know, get them to come in. And a really important thing is when you're getting people to play test is to stay silent and don't tell them too much, because you can give away too much of that initial experience. You kind of want to, the really important thing is that initial experience and what they're going to do and how they react and stuff like that. And affordances is a big part of game design. And what an affordance is kind of like a prior knowledge of, you know, the medium or what they're going to do, which is what makes kind of video games as an art very different from other art forms. You know, for the most part, you can go watch movies, and if you've never really seen a movie before, you can still experience it. You can change the genres without, you know, having too much of a shock. You know, it'll be a bit of adjustment. You know, if you're going from, you know, dramas to action, it's going to be, you know, different. But they're not going to make you feel bad and, you know, not let you experience it because you've never, you know, tried it before, which was different between video games. Because if you've only played games like Myst, or like an RTS game, and then you try playing like an FPS, you're going to have a bad time at the start because it's, you know, mechanically and functionally almost completely different. And video games can be kind of unforgiving, and that's kind of what the affordance is. If someone's played a lot of FPS games before and you're making an FPS game and you ask them to try it out, they're going to have a wildly different experience than someone who's never tried it before. But depending on what your target audience is, you want to make sure to at least be aware of that. You know, if you want it to be approachable, you're going to have to address that in certain ways.
Just to address the too many cooks in the kitchen comment that Talesha made, because I think this is a very important comment, and you see it in a lot of things, not just video games. You see it in like consumer software. I think that that's a very valid opinion, and you need to know which feedback is useful and actionable, which is not really in the scope of this discussion. But being able to weed out the not as useful, not as actionable feedback is very, very important, and it's a skill set all on its own.
Yeah. I like to focus more on the I didn't like this, I did like this, than the you should do this. If they're saying you should do this, I'm not even reading it. I know better what to do than probably the people playing it. I'm, you know, designing and playing are very different, but the people that are saying I didn't like this part of it, you know, this wasn't fun, stuff like that, where they're talking about their own opinion and experience of the game, that's a lot more valid. And if you start seeing that multiple times, where, you know, you're starting to say, hey, 10, 20, 30% of the people said they didn't have fun here, that's the critique you want to listen to. Those are the areas you want to look at. You have to figure out what change to make. Don't listen to what other people are telling you to change. Figure out what's not fun, fix it yourself. You're the designer.
Yeah, a big part of people playtesting too is everyone wants to feel involved. There's a kind of I wish I could source this properly. There's a quote I heard regarding someone who's making a chess game, and they just basically what the premise is they just leave something in that's very obviously wrong and a mistake because they needed to get a board approval on certain things, and they were finding that the more people involved, everyone wants to kind of have a say and feel like they're contributing to it. Even if there's no room to contribute, they're going to start kind of just making suggestions kind of wildly. So what they were doing was, you know, making the heads just not look right or obvious mistakes like that, so that, you know, they could figure out from watching them play if there was any issues with the game itself. But then when they gave feedback, they were just focused on the glaringly obvious mistakes instead of giving, you know, little things that, you know, were just to kind of, you know, they wanted to give some feedback and not just say it was perfect. Or some people just like to, you know, try to pick apart things that are very minor. It's a tool that can be used and wouldn't really play around for this stuff, but just kind of something to watch for is when you're getting people to play test your game, some of them will just kind of pitch a lot of random ideas. You want to be really careful of scope and scope creep. And even if they're good ideas, you still want to be really careful. That's kind of why I wanted to start with design first and talk about why some bad game design happens. And what kind of usually goes bad for a long part is scope issues. And I love that Cyberpunk was brought up because that was one that, you know, it's going to be a really good game, but it was over scoped and it's going to take too long to get there. If they cut back that scope, would have helped them tremendously, and to be able to
But
manage it.
they unfortunately promised a lot for that game, much like No Man's Sky. Like No Man's Sky, what, 5 years later now, has become more or less the game that they promised. It's just impossible for that team to finish that much stuff in the amount of time that they had originally said.
So
Yeah,
people
and-
laugh, people joke, people meme about From's approach to game release, where they just come out and they say, we're making a new game. And that's
I love
it. And everyone goes, it'll be out when it's ready. And all of the fans just sit and patiently wait. And people make fun of this, but you know what? They release top quality games every single time. Maybe not so patiently.
But yeah, it's I mean, like, I think the main thing about it too is, you know, their approach to hype buildup is so much different and a lot better than, you know, what a lot of game industries do. But it's like Cyberpunk's issue was, you know, the marketing team ran with a lot of stuff, and that also happened with No Man's Sky. You know, the guy who was going and doing all the talks, he was promising stuff that, you know, wasn't possible. And
Oh,
that's
we were
when
laughing.
like developers started noticing. The one thing that really tipped me off at first was like people kept asking if there's multiplayer, and they wouldn't definitely answer because they're probably still trying to see if they could do it. But then the person's like, "Oh yeah, there's multiplayer, but you know the chances of you seeing another player is like very slim." And like just alarm went in my head and being like,
They don't have multiplayer.
"They don't have multiplayer." You have to make a multiplayer. You have to start from the ground up because it's architecture at that point, and it's a lot of work to make a multiplayer game. When you get into development, it's very, very difficult to do. And basically what they just said is we're doing this very, very difficult thing to do, and then we're not going to use it because whatever reason. And I'm like, no, there's no way, there's no multiplayer, because if you made multiplayer, you want the players to use it because it's going to be expensive for servers, and the tech was expensive, and it's going to be core of the game. It's like, I don't know, it'd be like adding physics to a game and then being like, well, you can't actually use them, but they're there, you know? And it's like, well, what?
Why did you do all the work then?
Yeah, it's like, well, why would you do all this work to put it in? They're like, like there's no reason, right? It was just, they were just trying to sell it without fully committing to it, but they overpromised, and then credit to them, they came back and like the redemption came and actually made the game they wanted to, which is fantastic. But
A good analogy for the people that don't know the programming side yet would be like making a house with a fully furnished basement and then sealing it off and making no way to get to it.
Yep. Why would you do this? It makes no sense.
yeah, it was just a really weird statement for anyone who was involved with it, because without it, you know, think, oh, okay, you know, but when you know how much effort it is to do that, and then to, you know, have it, oh, maybe one player will experience it in this lifetime, it's like, okay. But yeah, scope is the main thing, and I kind of want to spend, as we get close to 5, the rest of it talking about the actual development, but we're going to be referring a lot to that. But a big thing is it's going to be when you want to start. Programming is going to take a while. It's going to be frustrating. It's not the most glorious thing to be diving into all the time, especially because our recommendation is going to be starting slow and starting fairly basic to ensure that you understand fundamentals and stuff like that. But the design and game design studies and stuff like that will keep you motivated and keep you going. And it's something to do on the side. I mean, if you feel like you're getting a bit burnt out, trying to go down that game development path.
Yeah.
You can also take courses that focus specifically on programming and designing and making video games, and I feel like that will often reduce a lot of the burnout that you feel, being like, oh, you know, I'm not getting any closer to my goal of making a video game. And if you can find a course that is more focused specifically on making video games, that will often help quite a lot.
I may have pimped a site that I still recommend, 50 or 60 times before, and I still recommend it. Very streamlined and focused and to the point to get you right where you need to go. 1 weapon, 8 warriors, a 3-act play of betrayal and tragedy. What?
I don't get it.
Hi, Needluck.
I'm
welcome,
sure that's
Needluck.
very insightful and poignant, but I don't get it.
Yeah, you just went right over all of our heads. Maybe you should be on the panel. Clue.
Clue. Oh.
I love that game too. That's unfortunate. I played that game a ton growing up. We had one of the original ones from like well, no, I don't know if it's the original ones, but we had a board game from like the 50s or something.
Nice.
I have Simpsons Clue.
Nice.
This is
my
like almost
experience
the
into it.
same thing.
I mean,
Yeah,
they basically are.
Reskin, metagaming. As we get into game development and stuff, like I said, we'll start off slow, which is learning language and syntax. And there's many different ways to do it, and this kind of comes down to your individual learning style. If you have support or budget to do, to take structured courses. At the end of the day, it's up to everyone kind of learns differently. At least for me personally, I do like courses. I wouldn't really recommend university for this right out of the start. A lot of the universities for this are private and can be very expensive compared to public universities. If you can find a school that kind of offers some game design courses, if you're already in university and you see that maybe there's an arts major that kind of has some game design and game development in it, maybe try taking some of those, which is what happened to me. I didn't even know that arts and technology was a major at my school. I was in computing science, then turns out there's this whole thing about interactive art media, and I'm like, oh, what the hell am I doing here? This is what I really want to do. So I swapped over to that, which has been fantastic. But that's not always available for everyone. So we'll kind of touch on a few things, but learning language and syntax, if possible, I would suggest those courses. You can even use things like Udemy or these online stuff. They go on sale for even like $10, which is very reasonable for the content they have. And some of them are they're quite large. They can go like 20 plus hours of content. Game Institute is pretty good too. They have a lot of curated stuff. And the main thing about it, like this structure of things, is that when you start this path, you don't really know what you need to learn. And that's kind of what happens with most people. Like, well, what do I need to know? Like, what do I learn? And you can, learn things. You can learn things, that aren't going to be too helpful. You can waste a bit of time. And the nice things about these things is that they're curated. There are people in the industry that know what you need to know and know a good way to kind of show it to you and have you, experience that and at a certain pace that, you'll be able to gradually build and understand.
They also have a knowledgeable and active curated forum for asking questions in when you're a member, which is a fantastic ad.
Yeah, and most of these things nowadays also have Discords and communities and all that kind of great stuff. I'm going to start pretty vague at the start and kind of go more into it for the sake of things. So one thing you'll see for games and game learning development paths is C++. Everyone will say you have to learn C++ for games. That was true. It does help. And if you're making games professionally and you're working with high-end engines, you will need to know C++ and familiarity with it. That's not so much the case anymore. Most of game development is going to be game scripting. And using a bit easier to, high level, but easier to use languages, more akin to something like Python. Most engines nowadays kind of even have visual builders. So as long as you just understand syntax and what a function is and what you're passing in and out of a function, the understanding of that. So it's mostly just learning what that programming is. C++, when you dive into that, you need to learn a bit of computing science in general for that, understanding what compilers are doing, understanding, memory management. There's a whole lot of other stuff that's not irrelevant, but adds more to your learning curve than is kind of necessary at the start. I highly suggest that, once you're familiar with a programming language or two and you're familiar with, that kind of atmosphere and environments, to start picking up C++ if you want to take this, farther, get into the nitty gritty of it. But a lot of people you'll see online will say start with C++. I can't recommend that anymore. It can be extremely frustrating. It's not very fun. A few people will do it and they'll say, hey, look, I did it. It's fine, but it's going to be, for everyone that makes it a couple hundred who didn't and then burnt out and, felt frustrated.
C++ is a very difficult language. It requires you to know how a computer works. It requires you to understand how to interact with the actual hardware itself. And all of that code has already been written. Use libraries, use engines.
Yeah. I started with C++, and I'm glad I did, because of the way my brain works. I like to understand the ins and outs of every little aspect before I get it. But not everybody does, and that's fine. The thing you should remember as you're learning to program is the language and syntax isn't nearly as important as the structures that you're learning and the basics of the programming, and you'll be able to apply that to any language. So you're making progress no matter where you are as you're learning to program. What makes C++ difficult compared to other languages, I'd say, is how you integrate third-party libs to your software. Well, manual memory management is probably what makes it the hardest.
I'd just say just even the environment setup, getting the
Oh
C++.
my God, setting up a C or a C++ environment.
Trying to get your hello world to compile and run is, you look at JavaScript, you can just press F12 on a web browser and type console.log and there you go. Or Python, you just run a single line. Everything else is like you install one thing and you're good to go. Like C++ has a lot of other stuff into it and kind of assumes you'll have a lot of other knowledge. And you can also do damage with C++, and it's like I said, if I'm not saying don't do it, but you just know what you're getting into before doing it. There's people out there that it'll work for them, but I'd say for the majority, if you want to just start getting into making games, JavaScript, C#, Python, that's kind of the go. C# is what's used in Unity for the most part. So if that's what you want to do, I'd recommend that. But at that point, you're kind of mostly just making functions and interacting with data. The syntax is different from the two, but they're not that different. At the end of the day, you're still trying to kind of accomplish the same thing. And once you learn one of those, you're very easy to kind of go and type, how do I do this in this? Like, how do I do this in C#? How do I do this in Python? You'll understand the syntax, what the end goal is, and you can kind of then, when you're using a different language, figure out how to do that. But I feel like this is one of the big pitfalls that's kind of happened to a lot of people over the years. Is you have to start at the you'll have to learn eventually. You might as well start it. This is where the best people start. It's everyone learns different.
Yep.
Do what feels best. Whatever's not, it's not going to matter at the end of the day. If if you just want to make games, you're going to be making games. So
learning is learning. Progress is progress. Don't worry about how other people got there. They all get to the same place. You can take your own path and get to the exact same place they are. Don't stress it. Just start learning.
Yeah, and then, like I said before, like a big issue, as always, is scope issues, and that's not even just for development. It's also just for learning. It's very easy to go down rabbit holes, right? If you're learning C++, like we said, you have to learn a lot of other stuff about computing science and how computers work and memory management and all this other stuff, and it can still be very exciting, and you'll want to do it, but it's still a lot more of that learning curve before you're at game development, and game programming is wildly different from traditional programming, or fairly different. It's kind of wild. We'll dive a bit more into that later, but
I would say game engine programming is very different from regular programming.
Yeah, and like game scripting is a bit wild. It's mostly just you throw in. We talked about it previously before, but it's not like you're going to be using a whole lot of this like computing stuff and memory management stuff you use, because at that point the game engine's doing all that for you. You're kind of just telling game objects to do certain behaviors at that point, and at that point, it's not really mattering what syntax you're using. You're still at the end of the day trying to translate English to binary code,
which is difficult, as it turns out. I will be right back, though. My puppy dog needs to go out for a pee.
That sounds important. You should probably deal with that.
That's what I was thinking.
So the kind of next thing, so like I was saying, learning syntax and kind of how to start. We kind of touched on courses and stuff like that, and we'll dive more into that later. If you're more of a book person, you can do books. If you want traditional education, you can go to school for it. You can do private camps or private universities. You can do boot camps. You can go to public university and take courses. But overall, on a vague kind of suggestion, the way that I'd say it would probably be best to start is just to start following tutorials. But change about 5 to 10% yourself. Even if this is a school project and a school assignment, after it's handed in, so you've completed it, the deadline's met. Don't do this beforehand. Like I said, scope issues before. You don't want to start losing marks in assignments because you're trying to, put in your flavor to it at the start. But follow tutorials or anything you learn. Go back and try to change 5 to 10% of it. This is not exclusive to just game development. This is just whatever tutorials you're following. When you first start learning to program, you're not going to be able to dive right into games. You're probably going to start doing like console applications. Like a very simple like bank thing. Maybe like rock, paper, scissors, or guessing, stuff like that. And there's a lot of tutorials out there and a lot of starts for that. Even Hello World. A really important thing is to go back and try to make modifications yourself, because you'll have that motivation of completing something, the guidance of tutorial to tell you the groundwork, but then you'll take 5 to 10% an easy change that will force you to do your own little bit of research and planning into how to make that, and that kind of reinforces the learning, as well as kind of keeps that motivation alive, because you're not just endlessly doing someone else's stuff. It still feels like it's your projects and your stuff that you're doing. This is a lot more for when you're making games and you're following tutorials to make games, because that's kind of one of the best ways to both learn the programming for game development and learn the engines if you're following, let's say, an Unreal or Unity tutorial. When you start doing that, start to try to figure out or find the gaps in your own knowledge. Like, trying to identify something that you would like to change in this tutorial or this game that you're making. If it's like a platformer, well, maybe I want to add a double jump or something like that if it's not in the tutorial already. And then you can start trying to look into, well, how do I add a double jump? Well, I've seen that this game or this tutorial taught me how to make a jump. Well, now I don't really know how to do a double jump, but maybe I can Google to search it, and maybe there's another tutorial on how to do double jump. And maybe it's not completely the same thing, but you can start to kind of figure out that skill of abstracting information and using it in your kind of use cases. Because when you start making games, you're not going to be able to Google the exact issue you have, because it's going to be contextually different, but you want to be able to abstract that information from other people's games and reuse them. And in that case, you'll find that, oh, maybe I want to add, like a Boolean or a flag that says, has jumped once. And then when you've jumped once, you've done it, or has double jumped. And if that's false and you're already in the air and you press jump again, then the character can then jump again. And now you have double jump. And, it wasn't in the original tutorial, but you took that 5 to 10% difference and added something on. And then now you're kind of getting into that habit of doing a bit of research and falling out. Because one thing that happened with me that I found is I could do these grand tutorials. And you'll find these ones online that'll be like, create this FPS game, or create this, you can create like a battle royale on like a weekend and stuff. But you can do it and you'll learn a bit doing it. But the moment you try to step outside on your own, you kind of just don't know what to do. If there's no guide, or there's no tutorial, there's no teacher, there's no anything that's kind of curated. If you're not learning those skills along the way, it's going to be hard for you to branch out and do things that aren't just, following a direct guide and, kind of writing code that already exists. So kind of do that along the way, no matter what your kind of learning path at the end of the day is. If it's like school, if it's online courses, if it's just, a book, try to add a bit of your own touch to it to force yourself out of that comfort zone, and still kind of learn those research skills. Because at the end of the day, that's a big part of it, is being able to research and abstract that knowledge to solve the problems that you run into.
I have absolutely nothing to add to that. That was well said.
Thank you. And I'm keeping this, as I said at the start of this, I'm keeping it very vague, and then we'll kind of go more into, the starting and paths and suggestions and ways to do it first. These are kind of just, no matter what way you go, these are kind of just what you'll kind of run into or what you should really be doing. Another thing is, what I always recommend is clone full existing games without a tutorial after you've done it a full times with a tutorial. I always suggest cloning classic arcade games. You can find tons on how to do, Space Invaders, how to do Pong, how to do
Pac-Man.
Asteroids. Pac-Man is a really good one as well, as relevant for the shirt I'm wearing. Learn to clone those with a tutorial at first to learn syntax and everything like that, and learn how to do it. And then, like I said, still add your 5 to 10% twist. Maybe Pac-Man has the ability to, hide for 10 seconds or blink or dodge, or, maybe in Asteroids you add, fuel, or you add, a different weapon type, or you can make slight modifications that'll force you to do that. But after you get kind of comfortable doing that, you do it a few times, make a few games, clone a classic, or clone a very simple game that already exists without a tutorial. And the reason for this, and why this is kind of a really important thing, is it gives you an end product to match and an end goal to kind of compare and to hit. But what it really does is it forces you to be very careful, or forces you into a scope restraint. And this is going to kind of come down to discipline as well. And you have to go into it stating and knowing you're not going to deviate from what this game is. That's why.
Welcome back.
I don't know what's going on.
There we go.
I've never really done that. It just drops for a bit. My router's probably overheating.
And now everybody's back.
Turn that off
Welcome back.
and come back.
There we go.
Unfortunate.
We had to cut to BRB screen because Sudo died in the middle of point, and I started going on about scope again and realized we've already made all the scope points we can. So I went to BRB to figure out what the hell was going on.
Scoping is super important.
It is important.
Super important.
It is super important, and we talk about it every single show for a reason, because scope will be the number one thing to ruin your project. And welcome, Zelo.
Thank you. Don't know what's going on. Hopefully I can fix it after panel for next panel. But yeah, like I was saying, and Rage, welcome back. I'll introduce kind of the point we're making is, clone some games with a tutorial, give you the full atmosphere of, what you need to do. And it kind of gives you a structure, change 5 to 10%. to kind of keep some flair and, stand out in your comfort zone and learn some stuff. But after you've done that and you're comfortable with like the full process and you've got a skill set, try cloning like full game without the tutorial. Keep it very simple. Like I said, still clone something like Pac-Man or Pong or Asteroids. So you know the skill set, you may have done it already, but do it without the tutorial. And what this will force you to do is kind of plan everything you need to do, kind of take that planning approach, and as well as gives you that end product to match your scope with. And you need to be disciplined to say you're not going to deviate from it. I have an end product to match. I can make all my changes, my 5 to 10% after I've completed it, but I'm just going to clone this game to this one as much as I can to my abilities without adding anything new. And the point of that is that it forces you into a scope restraint, and you get used to having a scope restraint, because it's one thing that you'll get into when you're making games is you're always going to want to, when you're working on something, well, what if I do this? Or what if it is? It's only going to take me about half an hour or an hour to add this. I'll just do it real quick. And you'll lose a lot of the time. And it kind of will
It never takes half an hour.
No, it might take half an hour at first, but then you'll run into an issue a couple days later and you're like, oh, okay, I need to rewrite that. And then all of a sudden you're, there's issues. And even then, like half hour to an hour is still very important time, to what your scope is. And maybe it wasn't even a change that helps. But it kind of helps you be disciplined in matching your scope. And then what that'll let you do is getting used to that, because that's something on the very start, especially when you first get the skill set, is you're going to be very exciting. You're going to want to kind of go crazy. And you'll notice that with a lot of indie games too, is that there's just so much going on. There is so much kind of half-baked features and stuff in there because it's exciting to do, but then none of them really get finished. So it's a really important thing to kind of start with, as well as it reinforces your skill set, because if you're staying without a tutorial, or if you're doing it without a tutorial, but then you need help, there's going to be thousands of people who have already cloned this game that you can now use as a research crutch to go and figure out without having to rely on a curated tutorial. You get used to trying to abstract those problems and find solutions for them and stuff like that, whether it's like collisions or AI or anything like that. That's not going to be too crazy, and it's going to help reinforce your learning and get used to being able to kind of stand on your own without the curated guide of the teacher or the course.
This applies to software as well.
Yeah, it's just project management as a whole.
No, I mean the meme on the screen. It applies to software as well. You may think your job is going to be a 20-minute ad until you encounter the issue that you never expected to encounter because you didn't even conceive of the issue, and now you're days deep in a little ad that you thought was going to be quick and simple, and now you're behind schedule. Don't do it.
Or at least be aware of the possible repercussions when you go to do it. As long as you know about it, you can plan appropriately.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just the start overall of just the very abstract stuff. Not going too much into different other things, but that's kind of the main thing. At that point, when you can start cloning games without a tutorial and making 5 to 10%, you have what you need. You just branch from there. You just start, at that point, you'll know kind of where your gaps in knowledge are, what your skill set is. You'll probably be in 2D. If you want to start branching into 3D, you already know how to learn. You have the skill set of learning in your tool belt, and that's kind of the most important thing. And you can kind of continue from there. And it's not going to be exactly like this. This is kind of just what's worked for me, but you'll along the way figure out what's kind of working for you. And then the point is that you get used to creating end products. And once you get used to creating end products, from there on, you can just keep doing that and branching up, being a bit more ambitious, and then finding out stuff you don't want to know and getting excited to learn new things and going forward with that.
And knowing how you learn is very important. Like Pseudo is excelling by taking classes, and he's getting really, really good, and he's learning a ton. I personally would fail miserably. I do very poorly in classes. The way that I learn best is by throwing myself into the deep end and going, well, that sucked. How do I make it not suck? So what works for some may not work for others.
I'm another clasp kind of person. I can't handle the black boxes. I need to have the whole picture. And if I just jump in and start doing it, I miss little pieces, and then nothing makes sense to me. Until everything makes sense, nothing makes sense. But once it all makes sense, damn, it makes sense.
Yeah, the structure is nice as well. Like I said, the main thing about like courses and stuff. It's that it's curated. It tells you or shows you kind of what you need to learn and helps fill those gaps. But there's so many free tutorials out there. It comes, as Rage was saying, it comes down to individual learning preferences, and you kind of need to find out what works for you. And what the motivation, what will keep your motivation, and what will be the least friction to entry. Whether it's a course that you pay for, or it's a university, or if it's a free tutorial, the kind of thing. The main thing is make sure to reinforce the learning on your own time, as well as change 5-10%. Keep it fresh and interesting, and keep the design element as well. When you're learning programming, make sure to also try to learn some design at the same time, and do some analysis and try to figure out that side of things too, because it'll help in the long run.
Helps understand what all the pieces do.
Cool. At this point, then, I'm going to start going a bit more into a bit more curated paths. The regions, I'm going to put example paths, which are going to be a bit more modern, and of course, this will change over time. Right now, for someone who says, I want to be a game developer starting tomorrow, I want to start learning, depending on what they have, what I'm going to say is download Unity and find a tutorial or find something that's interesting you, and start with the very basic tutorials. And this, of course, is going to matter to whoever it is. And a lot of people, I might catch some flack for this, and I'm not sponsored by Unity anyway. It's just from what I've seen in my experience, it is the most beginner-friendly engine that's out there right now. And that's not so much saying that it's a fantastic engine. It's good. It's just that it has the most resources, because the community for it is quite large, because it has been the largest free engine in a long time, which means that they focused on community development. They're very extremely helpful. A lot of resources out there, a lot of communities out there that'll help you learn. So that's why it's my recommendation. Not so much that it's the best. It's just that for starting out, you'll run into issues, and it's so much easier just to have a human being to ask questions to. And from my knowledge and my understanding, this is the engine that has that largest kind of user share for that use case.
Or if you're me, you're looking for the engine that has the best, easiest to understand documentation. And Unity is also an extremely good option for that.
Yeah. If you want to make a AAA top of the line game, then you already know what you're doing, and you don't need that documentation, and you can go ahead and struggle with something that's more high end. But don't start with the headache. Start with the easiest thing. Unity is fine. Unity makes some great games.
Oh, Unity's an excellent engine.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful, wonderful engine. I don't like the people who say that, you can't make AAA games with Unity, clearly haven't been paying any attention, because Unity has gone from like a small, indie engine to something that is extremely capable and extremely easy to use. It may be harder to get, 100% out of it, but you can jump in and get 80-90% very, very quickly.
Oh yeah, and it's a lot less headache. There used to be some serious headaches with just using it. Why am I crying engine?
Because you're trying to work with CryEngine, and it is notoriously horrible to work with.
Man, it can make some pretty games when you know how to use it, though.
Oh yeah.
And that's like the main thing with game engines too, is you'll run into restrictions, and that's why a lot of people were kind of shitting on Unity for a long time, is because they felt limited, and they don't have source access and a bunch of stuff. But for learning, that's not really going to matter. You're going to be making stuff that everyone's already kind of made before, and done before, so you're not reinventing any wheels. You're not going to need that level of access for a long time, and by the time you get there, you're going to kind of know what you're doing. And if you really need to, you can start branching off and looking at other engines, or if you're getting really good at programming, you can start exploring game engine development. I'm going to put a quick disclaimer: please refrain from making your own engines for a long time. That's a hole that I went down for so long. I have repos just full of half-finished game engines, because I don't know. It's what interested me. So it's a hobby, but the thing is, I'm going to make my own engine, because I won't run into these issues that these team of thousands of people did for some reason as one solo person. It's a fine approach.
Turns out you run into all of them, and it takes forever.
Yeah, and it's, as a hobby, they're really neat, and I do suggest everyone can try building a basic one just as for fun and following a tutorial. There's tons out there, and I
was going to say I recommend doing and draw engine. one basic 2D draw engine. So you're pulling your own PNG files in and drawing them to the screen and controlling them and move them. It'll give you a really granular understanding of kind of what's happening when you're doing the rest of what you do, and let you know better what you're asking the computer to do when you ask it to do things, but then never do it again.
The same thing I said about using libraries. Build it yourself once and then use the damn library.
Yeah.
If anyone's interested in the game engine side of things, let me know, because I have quite a bit of resources that I'm just squatting on because I'm never going to touch them again or use them really again. So I don't mind lending them or recommending them. But there's stuff either from like there's a build a game engine in JavaScript book that was surprisingly pretty good. It goes through that same thing of loading in image assets and playing audio and moving things around. The syntax is a bit outdated, but the overall approach is still fine. Cloning Doom engines is really fun. Doing like the ray casting stuff is really interesting because you go from, you start learning what 3D graphics was, and it is all still just 2D perspective, but how do we make 2D look like 3D and all that kind of fun stuff. But it gets a bit more complicated at stuff, and you start kind of having to go down rabbit holes. Yeah.
True.
But yeah, anyways, Unity, it has very basic, simple tutorials on the official website to help out, as well as the community. It's got a pretty decent documentation. I'm not going to say fantastic and great just because it's how it is, but compared to most things, especially for a beginner, you're going to be able to Google an error, and you should have at least something official, or at least official form, or some community support member that'll have an answer for the most part, at least when you're installing and setting things up, as well as when you're programming and stuff like that. As well as there's a lot of professional use outside of games, as well as professional career skill in the game industry as well. So you're still building towards, if that's your goal, to be a career, not just a hobbyist, it's going to help you towards kind of everything. You don't have to worry. I love the Godot engine personally, at least for 2D, it's my go-to. I just can't really recommend it right out of the gate for starting because documentation isn't quite there. The community is very helpful, but it's more, like I said, in the intermediate to advanced. They're not really going to be too helpful for really kind of starting out the game development journey. They will be, but there's just not a whole lot of those resources compared to something like Unity. But I wanted to give them a quick shout out because free open source and they're great. But yeah, so I'd say just start with Unity because it kind of covers most of its bases. Depending on how your individual learning paths is, that's kind of how you go down. If you want to go through documentation, that's all there for you to go through. If you want something a bit more curated, this is where it's going to start kind of branching a bit. There's kind of the professional, not professional, but the post-secondary kind of career defining, and I can't remember what the proper terminology for this. But if you go to formal education, I think the word I'm looking for, which is you're going to go to university for it. I don't know if there's a whole lot of stuff that's an explicit Unity course, but for the most part, what I'm seeing locally, a lot of schools are teaching using Unity. I believe the school I went to, they offer a game development bachelor's degree actually, and they use Unity heavily through that. So if that's the case, you're going to be kind of ready for that, and that's what you're going to be kind of using in an academic sense. I know a lot of schools use Unreal as well for the most part. It kind of comes down to what school is licensed for what, but you'll probably run into Unity there. But the path is, that's one of them is formal education, go to university for it. You'll learn a ton. I mean, they're curated. I can speak for the ones that are around us. I mean, it's going to change depending on where you're from and where you live. You're going to have to be a bit careful and do your research because there will be a bunch of courses out there that'll, have these grand claims and all this other stuff, but then you'll see they'll be quite expensive. And maybe at the end of the day, the quality of the education wasn't really worth the price that was paid for it. So you do want to be a little bit careful, make sure it's something that's accredited, something that's, recognized, at least in the industry. If possible, check forums. If you know anyone in the industry, talk to them about it. They'll usually kind of know, what's kind of reputable and what's not. If they're hiring people from that school, try to see if what their alumni are doing and where they're working, if that's the course of action you want to take. The other kind of, other than that, which is still, university costs a whole lot. But other than that, you can still do private online courses for quite a bit cheaper. Depending on how much you go into it, you'll pay a bit more, and there's certain things that cost more than others. Game Institute's an example of, it's got a bit of a price tag to it, but it's got quite a bit of content, and it's, from when I went through it a while ago, it was pretty high quality. They did a pretty good job of curating everything and having a finished product to go through. and have access to in forums and questions and stuff like that. But even stuff on sites like Udemy, and I can't remember the competition, but the same courses show up on all these kind of online sites. They're kind of independently created and then put on these sites. They go on sale. I have a bunch of them in my library. It's kind of my primary source for learning things nowadays on my own, is buying these courses for like $10 to $15 that have 8 to 20 hours worth of content of something that I want to know and learn, and then kind of go through that. And starting anywhere from just basic stuff to, maybe a bit more advanced, a bit more detailed stuff. The most recent example is I'm working on a driving game right now. So I bought a course on creating a 3D driving game in Godot, and I went through the whole thing, and a bunch of it, stuff I already knew, stuff I didn't need to know, but there was still a bunch of stuff that, I could grab from it. If you're into book reading, I like reading books, but I'm not great at reading a lot of academic stuff to put into programming. I like game design books and stuff like that, and I like that kind of knowledge. I'm not great at taking code from books and putting it in, but there's lots of bundles out there as well. Humble is fantastic for that, as Rach put into chat. As well as there is a link I'm going to post in the chat, which will also post. I have pinned in our Discord, but it's the study path for a game programmer.
That would be the game dev channel in Discord. You should be there.
And this one's pretty involved. I'm not sure if Diaz wants to bring it up on the stream and give it a scroll through, but this one will kind of cover everything you need to know. And this is something that if you're really into self-teaching and you can have the discipline to kind of go through that, this is an incredible resource. These books can be a bit pricey, but they are in your local libraries, as well as digital versions exist. You can find them any way that you need to. I'm not going to advocate for anything.
And a lot of I don't know about these books specifically, but a lot of programming resources and a lot of development resources are available for free online legally, and they just charge for the paperback versions because they got to make money somehow.
Yep. Game Programming Patterns is a good example of that. The web version is free, and then they just charge for the physical versions as well, but there is a free version online.
This is a very interesting one. Mathematics for game programming I found super interesting once I got into it. You start learning all the shortcuts they are forced to take and why, and you're like, oh, that's very interesting.
How much do you like linear algebra? Yeah, as overall, this is like even just outside of the books, just that flowchart right there is kind of a good. If you want to get into it as a career, these are kind of the topics you're going to need to know depending on what level of programming you're going to want to be doing. But you're going to at least want to be familiar with all of this stuff. You want to be familiar with, computing science, programming, and software in general, because you're going to be working with software. But you want to know a math foundation to understand what the games are actually doing in the engine side and under the hood to, make the games happen. Game programming there, what that means is, programming actual game logic and game state, game behavior. One other big thing for game development and programming, it's just state management. It's just all a game is just a state. And then you just get to modify that state with a bunch of different methods, and then what a screen is doing is just showing you the current game state. It's just doing that very fast and very rapidly,
and sometimes even accurately.
Sometimes,
sometimes inaccurately.
Most of the times.
I'm not going to talk about multiplayer because my God, that's a complicated topic. Game engine development, like I said, it helps to know for when you need to get to like lower level issues and optimizations, but I wouldn't recommend for it. But it makes sense to start that, and then from that you kind of branch into all those other ones, because every topic after that engine development is encapsulated inside of a game engine. It's kind of a nice way of showing what is a game engine. It's the thing that is basically just a bunch of collection of software libraries and modules and frameworks that allow you to work with graphics, audio, physics, animations, AI, and if you have it, multiplayer, as well as give visual tools for developers to use so they don't have to just write code to do everything, such as Unity's editor.
For a lot of the stuff like game engine development, computer graphics, that kind of level of stuff, you don't need to know enough to do a lot of it or get a job in it. You just need to know enough so that you can talk about it without getting confused. That's sort of the level you need to be at. Just understand it. Get the understanding and the idea of it so you know what it's doing. always been curious if there are people in the industry who specialize in netcode for multiplayer games, or if it's just something covered. Yeah, no, yeah, it's a major specialization.
Yeah, for sure.
Engine developers, like any other kind of software developers, end up being very specialized. Like my specialty, as it stands now anyway, is working specifically inside a web browser, building complicated things inside a web browser. The web browser being my engine in this case. But that isn't to say I couldn't do other things, or you couldn't learn to do other things if you're already specialized. But there's just so much knowledge in general that you can't hold it all in your head.
Yeah, every single area has so much to know that not even the people specialized know everything there is to know in the field they're specialized in, and need to work in a team to get it done. It's a vast field of knowledge, and that's why so many games multiplayer sucks.
And then on top of this, the technology is always ever changing, so there's always new bleeding edge stuff to learn. But specializations, if you're wanting to be a career-focused game developer, you're going to need to specialize. And this is going to be a multitude of different things. And one way to kind of figure out, what specializations are out there is just for your area, start looking at job listings for the game industry, and you can kind of get an idea of what's out there. You'll start seeing, rendering programmer, or engine development, or game tools developer, or gameplay mechanics developer,
MTX developer.
Yeah, UI engineer. There's all these different specializations that are there, and you can start figuring out what you'd probably like to do at the end of the day, and start mastering it, focusing on that, doing that. If there's school things, there's probably certain courses going to be more tailored towards that. So maybe choose those over other ones to kind of really build that foundational stuff.
To call out Val's point about some indie developers that are one person, that literally all comes down to scoping.
Yeah, Axiom Verge was so well scoped.
Wonderful game. Absolutely beautiful, wonderful, amazing game. Extremely simple.
Short, too. But so much work put into the levels that he did do, and so much thought put into the little bit of story, and effort put into the little bit of writing, and design and put into the level and the progression, made it true Metroidvania. He didn't need a lot. He worked on what he had with what he had.
Necessarily call it Metroidvania. It's just kind of a love letter to Metroid. But there is a second one coming out, and I'm very excited about it.
It's still a Metroidvania.
It is just Metroid.
Metroid is a Metroidvania.
Metroid Prime is a Metroidvania. Actually, Super Metroid as well.
Okay, yeah, that's more what I'm saying. It's a Super Metroid love letter. More than a Metroid love letter. If it was a Metroid love letter, it wouldn't have a map.
So, yeah, anyways, back to topic. If you're career focused, you need to find a specialization you like and start to master it. This can be a bit risky because the industry changes so much, and for the most part, it's not going to go away. But what happens to a lot of it just happens in software and just the world in general when you do profession is sometimes the world moves forward and your profession gets outdated, and if you don't stay along with it, all of a sudden it's not as relevant anymore. And we see this with like old school software stuff like COBOL and maybe BASIC, and there's still legacy stuff for it, but it's not as in demand in today. And the same thing can happen in any industry, including video games and stuff like that too. So just be aware of that. Don't get discouraged. Find what works. If you know how to learn, you can transition. If you need to go back to school, you can hopefully go back to school. But career, that's when you're going to be working in a large company for the most part, and you're going to be specialized on one thing. You're either going to be like the UI engineer, and that's going to be your main thing. You're going to be doing combat design, or maybe you'll be designing elements for player interaction. You can do even out of programming side of things. You could be still doing like animation controlling and all this other stuff. So in the industry is huge with so many seats. I'm not going to go through and list them all. But a good way to kind of see what's out there is just check job listings, and you can kind of see what's in demand and what's there, and anything that kind of interests you, you can say, hey, I kind of want to do that. And you can figure out from, if it's a university you want to do, what the university offers for it, as well as self-teaching. You can find what online resources are there for that specialization and how to kind of get into there. If you're going indie, and there's a lot of risk to this as well, because this is assuming that if you want to do this full time, you're going to need to identify and amplify your strengths, as well as work on improving any the weaknesses you have. An example of this is, let's say if you're a very, very skilled and gifted programmer, but your art, maybe you don't have the art skills that you might need. You'll see a lot of indie games where, they're programmed very well, but they look beautiful, and you're like, well, how do they do them all? And it's like, well, it takes time. They started off, either they were not a great programmer or they were not a great artist, but they built that over time to get there. So don't get too discouraged from other examples. Just find what's there. If you're a great programmer, focus on making the game very fun to play and very smooth, very control well, amplify that as much as you can, and then rely on simplistic art style. You are allowed to, of course, go and find existing assets and buy them and use them. Just be careful that they're consistent, because consistency is a main thing when making a game. If you have the budget, you can hire artists. If you're doing all the art yourself, find what your ability is and what the weakness of what your limit is, and then try to design your game around that. So for me, I've only been learning 3D modeling for a very short period of time compared to other skill sets I have. It's not very great. But I can do low poly stuff decently. So the games I make are low poly, and that doesn't mean they have to look bad. You can look at games like Valheim. You can look at games like, I always just want to call it Space Dwarfs, but
Deep Rock.
Space Dwarves.
Deep Rock, they're not super high fidelity. Deep Rock's a bit more higher quality models and assets, but it's mostly like texturing and stuff like that, and it's a lot of it's just modern hardware can make modern textures look really nice, and most of it's just lighting. Turns out, with really nice lighting, even low poly looks very nice. But I can use my low poly assets and just find an art style and artistic, and now it's part of the experience. Okay, well, I have low poly, so it's not realistic. It's not going to look realism, which means it's already not going to be taken too serious. I can start kind of exploiting that fact and make it more of a silly game, make it a bit more casual and stuff like that, and not have to put myself. If I'm making like a full realistic racing game, the expectation is going to be that the cars are going to at least look real to some degree, or try to match real life stuff. And my modeling skills are going to be nowhere close to that. I can do low poly stuff and kind of arcade racing. So that's the example. And as the skills develop, I can maybe go more in that side and do things. But just try to not bite off too much you can chew. Identify what your like I said, your weaknesses, because that's going to help you with scope and help you actually plan and make something that's going to be releasable and something that you can actually finish.
Yeah, absolutely. We always love to point out Hollow Knight as well as a beautiful example of just high polish on fairly simple assets. It's your polish. It's how much time you spend perfecting everything, not so much the fidelity of the product.
Low poly with nice shaders doesn't work for everything. It works for a lot of things. It doesn't work for everything.
Valheim is very low poly for all their stuff, and their textures are even low. That game is a gig. I mean, it's probably larger now with updates, but when we were playing it was only a gig, which is just mind blowing because it was low quality stuff. But it was just the style. It was just so stylistic.
All it was shaders. It was just really, really nice shaders.
I look forward to seeing where it goes. I really do.
Yeah. And for people who don't know what a shader is, it's basically just code that you're running on your graphics card to do kind of complex math for lighting and actual shading. Originally came from shading of the objects to give that appearance of the light hitting in a certain angle and the shade casting on it, but it's taken on a full more thing of just basically stuff that's running on a GPU, but stuff at the end of the day that makes the graphics look a certain way.
The 2-minute history on it is it's called a shader because when we named it, it literally was only used for doing the shading. That's literally all it did. And then as the scope of it grew, we never bothered updating the name. So it's anything that runs on the graphics card, basically.
Yeah, and that's a whole topic that's fun and scary and complicated. I don't recommend jumping into them right away.
That's advanced. Yeah,
kind of do that for you, but they're pretty cool.
If you want to talk shaders and different designs for shaders, go ping Egg in the game dev channel.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, that's another really important topic as well, is finding people in the community, especially like our community. Feel free to join our Discord and ask any of us. We all love to help people, beginners to people who, like we've talked about Egg, who is very experienced and very, very skilled and is making a game, will still, like to ask for opinions and help and feedback. And that's a really important resource to use, is having people that are either in industry or in the hobby or whatever, have some knowledge that you can, talk to them. If you're stuck somewhere, ask their advice, or even if you and Egg does this with me, most of the time he's messaging me stuff and I have no idea half the stuff, but I can, the odd little thing, I can ask a question back and kind of, it's called rubber ducking in software, and they kind of will think about why they chose a certain path, and then, maybe I'll do it some way. And even though it's over my head, I can still at least ask some questions to help, move things along if they're stuck. And it's really important to have those resources and find someone that's maybe, can act maybe like a bit of a mentor and have that bit of knowledge that you can feed from. It's always great to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, because then that'll, of course, bring you up to their level and learn from as many people as you can.
My least favorite thing is being the smartest person in the room.
Big agree.
Yep.
Which is hard because you only get good pay if you're the senior. But yeah, the ability to rubber duck, I think, to use the phrase that Pseudo used, to be able to bounce ideas off of people and even just ask questions about the basics. Egg often comes to me as well to ask questions about how he's designed something, and I may not know anything about how the code actually works at its lowest level, because I'm not a C++ programmer. I suck at C++. But the fact that I can ask a question about the fundamental assumptions that somebody has made, and you say, oh well, why is it done that way, can be very useful when rubber ducking to challenge the base assumptions that you come in with, because sometimes those assumptions are incorrect.
Yeah, you're usually just stuck in your own mental loop, and you need somebody to push you a little bit and make you think about something in a little different way. Even for just a moment, the solution you come up with might not even have anything to do with what they asked about. It's just something to get the brain off of its current track. Speaking it out loud and talking to yourself can also help. If you have nobody to get at the time, verbalize your problem, and you'll use a different part of your brain to think about it.
It's true.
Yeah, that's why I was referred to as a rubber ducking, because it was common that they would just have a rubber duck on their desk and they would just speak to it. And it seems kind of silly, but it really does work. It kind of forces you to, use a different part of your brain, and you think a bit abstractly and kind of realize what's kind of going on. And, explaining it's a bit different than just thinking about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a very, very key thing that Pseudo said there, is that if you have to explain something, you need to understand it better than just doing it. There's two different levels of knowledge here. And in order to translate what's in your head into something that other people can understand, you have to understand that topic.
Yeah. That was one of my tricks in school as well, as after I was finished my work, I would help as many people as I could and just look at all the issues everyone else is having and all the places they're getting stuck and try to help them get through those stucks. And then I've seen all these different issues and, potholes and places that people can fall into, and it helped my understanding of the subject a lot.
Big agree.
Become the mad person, talk to yourself 24/7. What do you mean become?
Yeah, what does this become? Why do you think Deus streams? It's what he does anyway. He just sits there, plays video games, and talks to himself.
Yeah, like I have said many times, when I'm sitting there and talking about my thoughts and everything, that's not for the stream. That's just literally me playing games. It's just what I do. I'm just less crazy if I'm talking to people, so I stream it. Yeah.
Whew. Yeah, I guess there has been too many questions. I was hoping to kind of go over some of the questions that came up, but like I said, if you ever have anything pop up later, feel free to join the Discord and cover us or ask us, and we'll cover them. I try to keep this a bit
cover us and we'll ask them.
Yes.
Oh baby.
I try to keep it a bit vague because it really matters where you are location wise. Like we're kind of based out of like Canada and as well as the Vancouver area, so we have different resources available for us locally than other people might, as well as there's difference in budgets, difference in support, all that kind of stuff. Not everyone can go to school for full time to pursue it, or even go to school part time. So we try to keep things just the possibilities that might work for people. But for the main thing is, if you want to get into game development, you just have to do it. You just need to start making games and try to identify what barriers are preventing yourself. So I'm sure there's a lot of people here right now that would like to, but it seems a bit complicated. It seems a bit scary. You don't really know where to start. And you can just start by, like I said, find an old game that you kind of want to clone. If you don't want to dive right into tutorials to learn, just find an old game that you kind of want to clone and then see if there's a Unity tutorial to make it. See if you can make Pong in Unity and just get started there just to see if you even like it. Maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's just not as fun as you thought it is and you want to try something else or a different hobby, and that's completely okay. But I'd say just at least try. I think a lot of people I've talked to, I said they really want to, but they're for some reason, it can be very intimidating. But I would say, just try, especially before even if you want to go to university for it. I'd also say just try so that kind of what you're getting yourself into before you kind of commit to tuition,
thousands of dollars.
yeah, because that's unfortunately also very common with that approach. Is you'll spend a bunch of money to realize that it's not really for you, and that happened to me as well. Like I've been doing computing science for a while, and that's what I was doing at my current university, and I've taken a bunch of courses for that, and then I found arts and technology, and I'm like, wow, I really like this, and maybe it's not the complete same career wise, but you know what, I'm already, for my situation at least, I'm already in a career pretty far in that. Like finishing a computing science degree wasn't going to help me too much. It was mostly just I was already sunken cost kind of, I'm already so far, I might as well finish. But to change things like that, it can get kind of expensive if I didn't try it out first and really figure out, okay, this is something I can do. I always kind of put barriers in front of myself to at what levels I don't think I'd be able to do it that way. And it, not just programming, but that also applies to art as well, because we find out like a lot of times that people will be scared because they just assume they can't, because maybe they're good at programming, or maybe they'll just say to that. And I'd say the same thing, or what I found out is just try, just try it a few times. If you're interested in 3D modeling, follow a basic Blender tutorial. It's not as difficult as you think, and learn the fundamentals of how to do the techniques, and then start just changing 5 to 10%. And you keep doing that, and eventually you'll be able to do 100%, and completely go from scratch yourself and create things that you never thought that you could probably create. And you'll tap into your creativity, because I think that's something that everyone does have in them, but it does take some practice to kind of harness it, and a bit of confidence to really put it out there.
Yeah, everyone has creativity in them, absolutely. It's just everybody has different outlets for expressing it. Some of them are less obvious than others.
Like, for instance, I cannot do physical art. Can't do it. Terrible at it. I can't translate what's in my head into a physical thing. But I can write creative solutions in code, and I can make music. Those are the two things that I have for my creativity outlets.
I've done poetry and stories and games. I love games. A few different people that are working on games come to me to bounce their mechanical ideas off of me. Is this going to be fun? How would you approach this? I love those situations. You got those questions? Bring them to me. Bring them to me.
Super fun.
I'll work through them all with you. Don't worry. We'll come up with some amazing stuff. It'll be beautiful. Beautiful.
So we haven't really talked about too much from in this panel. We always have to touch on a bit. So a little bit, but I want to, we haven't gone on a tangent, so I want to poke the bear and do that a bit. But I want to give an example of when I was talking about game design and what it means to do analysis. And one of my favorite examples of something is analyzing the combat system in Sekiro and analyzing the combat system in Dark Souls, and comparing and contrasting them, because at the surface, a lot of people will think it's the same. They kind of group them together. But when you really break them down and analyze them, they are very, very different.
Completely opposite, actually. Literally completely opposite. You want to have the exact opposite approach in both games.
Which is and it touches on a whole bunch of stuff too, and you'll see and examples of this and a bunch of stuff. But they're very different, even though at the surface they may seem like they're, people will group them in or whatever, but the feeling from it, to the design, to the pacing, to everything, as well as to just people's approaches to them, which was one thing that I found was interesting, because Deas and Rage come from a background that they were playing Dark Souls games before, or from games similar to that before, and then the experience they had first picking up Sekiro versus my experience first picking up Sekiro when I hadn't played it before. Enemies that they had trouble with at first, I didn't, because they were fighting them with the affordance of the Dark Souls series, and I was just going in as an action game, and I was just kind of like, I'm gonna go right in and start smashing face. That didn't work for me when it got to bosses too well, because you still need to have that same approach that Dark Souls has for being very methodical.
No, you don't. No, you
exact
don't.
opposite approach to bosses too.
What I meant was for this, when it comes to kind of like timing and parry and
sure, you need the mechanical skill.
The mechanical skill.
You do need to think before you act in Sekiro as well as Dark Souls. That's a similarity. You need to put the thought in before you press the button. As soon as you start spamming the button, it's a bad day.
Yeah, so spamming in Sekiro can get you by a bit at the start. Some of those enemies, the aggressiveness does pay off, and you'll just kind of get them down like that. Like the troll, the starts off. But when I started getting to the bosses, has beautiful boss design, and they make you learn the patterns, learn the methodic. Like, you be very methodic of what you're doing, and you kind of like chess moves, couple moves ahead, what's coming up next, and all of a sudden I'm just stuck and completely dumpstered for a bit until I adjusted. And that's just the example of the two different things. They came from before, and they struggled those enemies before, but then they adjusted and they can move forward from there. Me, I didn't have trouble that first couple enemies because like I was just right out of the gate. I didn't know what to expect, and that's where playtesting comes in, and different backgrounds, different affordances. Doesn't mean I was like, I said, just two different experiences at the start. Because I remember when I downed that thing, I think you were assuming that it would take me some time, and I kind of just like got it. But then like Butterfly took me a long time, like very, very, very long time, like very.
It's so funny to me how we had such different experiences in the game, because I at that point had like a couple thousand hours in the Souls series, and the Deus had played each of them once, I believe, including Bloodborne, and Pseudo, you were fresh, and we all struggled on different things, and that is so cool to me. Like, that's just so awesome. Like, there's the corrupted monk, for instance, the phantom one. Deus struggled hard on that boss. It took him quite a few attempts, whereas I literally first tried it.
I almost quit the game over that boss.
I did quit the game over Demon of Hatred. Fuck that boss.
But it's, I've got my own little case study that I've just been running, because I've convinced two people to play the game recently, and I've been watching them both play through it. And one of them, it's their first ever From game, and the other person had a ton of Dark Souls experience. And I didn't want to help either of them. I just sat back and sadistically watched them die and suffer until they asked for some pointers. The person who had never played any From games asked for pointers first, because he had never played any From games and didn't have any other qualms with it. Didn't have that From mindset yet of, I've got to get this myself, which From breeds into you. I'm not saying it's any bad or good thing to not have it. It's just after you started playing those games, that's why you start thinking. So he asked for a couple pointers, I gave it to him, and then he approached Sekiro as a Sekiro combat system, and he trashed that game. He trashed that game pretty hard. The person who had played a lot of Dark Souls had pain until I started giving them pointers, because they tried to play it like Dark Souls, and in a more subtle example, it's like the differences between Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. Like, there's a way to approach a shooter
that has traditionally been the way to play an arcadey shooter, and that's what you see in Doom 2016 of, maybe dodge and weave a little bit, but you find your gun and you take that gun and you go shoot things with it.
As long as you're moving, you're okay.
And the difference being in Eternal, you can't do that anymore. You have to approach it entirely differently. You have to use every gun. You have to weapon switch, or you just will get dumpstered immediately.
Unless you're on the easier settings. They were quite forgiving on the easier settings.
You can still get dumpstered pretty hard on normal.
I said the easier settings. There's like 6 or 7 difficulty settings.
But yeah, like just the way that you approach it, being able to break those patterns in your mind is extremely important for being able to approach games like that. Like the way that you play a Dark Souls game, if you try to play a Sekiro playthrough like you play Dark Souls, you're gonna get your ass kicked.
Even to
100%.
even to a lesser example, if you try to play Bloodborne the way you play Dark Souls, you're going to get your ass kicked. And they're actually considered both Souls-likes. They are entirely both in the Souls-like setting. It's as simple as a boss design change. To highlight this change, it's as simple as in Sekiro, when bosses attack, they move forward. Or not Sekiro, Bloodborne, when bosses attack, they move forward. That's the change. That's essentially the boss design change, which creates an entirely new strategy need. Because in Dark Souls, spoiler if you haven't played Dark Souls, but here's how you win: you roll backwards.
Or you get around it and you hit it in the butt.
Yeah. But if you can't go around it at the time, you roll backwards. You're fine. Just roll backwards. That's how you win. Then you get to Bloodborne and you roll backwards and you get stomped.
You just get monstered immediately.
You're like, what happened? And it's just because enemies now carry forward. So if you roll backwards, their attack follows you. And when you come out of your roll, they're right there on top of you and still attacking. And you just get destroyed. And, it changes the entire way you have to approach the game with a tiny little boss design change. So tiny, I would still call them the same genre. Or you try to heal from full screen and die.
Yep.
Gotta know when it's safe. Yeah, so here's a quick little tip and spoiler. My way to find a healing spot is if I could attack there, I can heal there. And it
takes about the same amount of time.
And that's sort of why they do it that way. Think of it as if I haven't gotten hit and I've made this opening, I get free damage. If I have gotten hit and I made this opening, I now need to decide if I want to heal or damage. Most people go for the damage and then realize they need to heal and then try to heal and get dumpstered.
Or you can be me and just be like, I'm not healing. This is fine.
Yeah, that's the alternative. If you do go for the damage there, just don't heal right away. And the next time they try to hit you, don't get hit, and then use that opening to heal. Or don't heal and just keep on trying to not get hit and hope you don't make another mistake. But yeah, the reason people complain about healing in those games is because they don't understand the mechanic going on behind the healing and why it's designed that way. Once I explain the design and understanding of a lot of these mechanics to people, they go, oh, I don't mind it so much now. You just got to change how you think about it. It's all how you approach it. Yeah. I think we're good on time. Is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I was going to say that anyone can analyze a game, and it's very, very helpful to see why the decisions are made, and that even there's different decisions within the different studios of the game, and how much even a simple change can drastically sounds bad. How much a simple change or what seems like a significant change can, make how the game feels be completely different. Not necessarily good, not necessarily bad, but just completely different styles from just something as an attack. The bosses now attack forward and stuff like that.
Games suffer greatly from the butterfly effect. Whether good or bad change, the butterfly effect is real in games. Super real.
And to tie it back to game development learning, when you're talking about the design of a game, that is a very important concept to understand. Little teeny tiny changes to how one part of the game functions impacts all of the other mechanics. And this is something that we talked about at length in Resident Evil 8 review, because I think they fucked up the inventory. And that ruined a lot of the other parts of the game.
Although interestingly, I've heard a lot of other people in other Discords say the older Resident Evils were bad because they had such limited inventory.
I mean, I guess it comes down to whether or not you like historical Resident Evil, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's an opinion thing at that point, but it's definitely not survival horror when you've got the big inventory. Anyway, I'm super hungry now. Because I've only had a burrito all day and it's 6 p.m. Nanu, Mr. Lowe, and good evening. The different schools of inventory. Yeah, I mean, we could do a panel on that too. Easily.
Maybe we should.
Maybe we should.
Inventory design in different kinds of games.
Different approaches to inventory design in different games. Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of examples. Go to every genre of game has inventory management. We could look at them all and the pros and cons. What are we doing next week? I think I've already got it planned. Let's do a quick
Review.
Yeah, I know it's game reviews. I think I've even got it put somewhere.
I think it's in announcements.
Control in the Surge 2. But we didn't do Control. We did Control before because we moved Yakuza 3, so it'll be Yakuza 3 and the Surge 2. We needed you here
Gross.
for Yakuza 3, Suda. We didn't want to do it without you because I didn't finish playing it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Alrighty. So, thanks for hanging out. I hope you've learned something. I hope we've inspired at least somebody to pick it up and start trying and pursue their desires. Honestly, I felt like they fixed camera angles were what made old school RE the toughest. I understood why they were done like that, though. Yeah. There's so many reasons. Not going to get into it. Thanks for joining.
A lot of stuff.
Hope you learned. Hope you enjoyed. Hope I see you again soon. Might be back later. If I am playing games, I'll stream whatever I did. We pewed all night without streaming it for any of you.
Yeah, we did start at like 11 though.
Yeah, it was pretty late. So I'll see you later. Until then, I'm Deus.
I'm Rage.
And I'm Pseudo.
And may all your shots be headshots.